What if we could grow seedlings without adding to piles of plastic waste, and while doing so, produce significantly healthier and more vigorous seedlings? Sounds jolly good, doesn't it? And that's where these guys come in. Sowing usually begins with pots or plug trays like this, but come closer and you'll see the problem with them. The flimsy nature of most plastics means that they readily crack and sort of crinkle like this, and after a few seasons they're good for only one thing: throwing away. Really solid, well-built plug trays like these will last for many years. They're really durable. But what if you want to ditch plastic once and for all? Well, let's look into that. Now, I can't wait to show you what this quirky contraption here is for, but first, let's look at some alternatives to plastic pots and plug trays. They're all biodegradable and use materials you'll almost certainly have lying about at home. First up, newspaper pots. Now, I've made these in the past and it's immensely satisfying to do. Don't worry about the ink on newspaper, it's almost certainly soy-based and so perfectly safe to use. Now, to make our pots, you need a kind of cup with straight sides as our mould, and we're going to cut the strips of newspaper down to about 1 inch or a couple of centimetres taller than the pot. Now, the first thing we're going to do with our strips of newspaper is fold a little flap about 1 inch or a couple of centimetres along the top like that, and then unfold it. And then we're going to put this on our pot. So we're going to have the fold here where we've done our little flap at the top of the pot, and then roll it like this to close it off. And then flip the pot over so we've got the bottom facing up, and then just push in the bottom like this and go along, working along the sides here to crimp the sides to give it a more firm structure. Then flip it back, squash it down, remove your cup, and now that flap we made earlier, we're going to fold that back in to firm up the rim of the pot. And there we go, we've got our little pot here. Now this will really firm up once we put our potting mix in, and something like this size would be great for sowing bigger seeds like squash, for example. But you can use different sized cups for making different sized pots. Toilet roll tubes or loo rolls make fantastic little containers for deeper rooted crops like, say, corn, peas or beans. Just group them together like this so they're all snug with each other, fill them with your potting mix and sow. And you can always cut down taller tubes to make squatter pots. Cardboard egg trays are fantastic for smaller seeds and seedlings with a smaller root system. Now, the great thing about all of these is that they are obviously biodegradable, so you can actually plant the whole thing into the ground without having to remove it. Although with some of this cardboard, I might peel off the sides just to help the roots escape. If you can't be bothered to make your own pots, then well, there are plenty of biodegradable seedling pots to buy. When watering any pots or plugs made from cardboard, take a little bit of effort just to make sure that the potting mix is kept moist, but you're not thoroughly wetting the cardboard. At least don't have it sodden all the time. That way it won't go sort of mouldy and potentially kind of collapse. Also, contain your biodegradable pots in some sort of container just to hold them together so they don't flop over. I really love my sturdy plug trays, but I am generally trying to reduce how much plastic there is in my life, and that's because it gets absolutely everywhere. Did you know, in fact, that a recent study found that the average human brain contains around 5 grams or 1/5 of an ounce of microplastics? To put that into context, that's the equivalent of 1 teaspoon of sugar here. That can't be good for us. Any biodegradable alternative is a fantastic way to cut waste, but what if you could do away with the pot or plug tray altogether and use nothing more than the potting mix? Well, that's where this bad boy comes in, a soil blocker. It's really quite simple. The potting mix is pushed into these little compartments here, compressed down, and then you push down on the handle and it releases them, and these little insert dimple things here rather handily create the depressions to sow into. But won't the potting mix just fall apart, I hear you ask? Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But the secret lies in getting the right recipe for our soil block here. We want the block just to hold together long enough until the roots reach the edge of the block or it's time to transplant. The secret ingredient that's going to hold everything together is this coconut fibre or coir. Now, this acts a bit like medieval wattle and daub in sort of bringing everything together, because it's got lots of little fibres that sort of act like glue to give it all structure. I bought this as a block, which I've rehydrated, and I'm now going to add about 2 parts of this to get our mix on the way, and I'm going to sieve or screen it to remove any kind of longer strands. Next up, 1 part sifted garden compost. This will help to add some body to our mix as well as some nutrients. Now, if you can't get hold of garden compost or you don't have any, then just any all-purpose potting mix or a bought-in multi-purpose compost would do just fine. And then 1 part garden soil for extra kind of bulk and body. Then 1 part perlite for drainage. And then to finish, 1 generous handful of volcanic rock dust. Now, if you can't find that, then something like azomite or green sand would be fantastic. And what that'll do is add a few more nutrients to help our seedlings along until it's time to plant them. Now, let's get mixing. Now, please don't worry if you don't have all these ingredients to hand. There are as many recipes for soil blocker mixes as there are recipes for chicken soup or chutney. Here are a few ideas to try, and some even have success with nothing more than a standard quality seed starting mix. So have a little search and try a few out to see which you prefer. As it stands, our mix will just fall apart, so I need to add 1 final ingredient to make it all stick together. That's water. Now, I'm going to add it in stages, a little bit at a time, so I don't overdo it because it's hard to kind of go back from it being too wet. What we're aiming for is a consistency that's a bit like kind of cement, so it's wetter than if you were just pre-moistening the mix to sow seeds into plug trays. We're looking for something a little bit wetter than that. So just mix it all up until you've got a consistency a bit like this. Now let me show you. If I take a good handful out, you can see there's water coming out, but when I compress it, it kind of holds together like that, a bit like a snowball. That's perfect. And now for the fun parts, let's get making those soil blocks. So I'm just going to go in and press down on our mix here. It can be quite firm, don't worry about that. At the end of the day, we need to kind of make sure it's nice and firm so it all holds together. And once you've got it all filled up, you can see it's a bit rocky. We need a nice flat base so it sits on the tray nicely. So just scrape it off like that and then pop it onto the tray here and then press down on the handle while lifting up to release our blocks, the moment of truth. There we go. I think that looks all right. Between each set of soil blocks, just dip it in water like that. And what that does is it will sort of lubricate the sides of your blocker maker here so they come out a bit easier. This is where having a flat bottomed container to put your mix into really helps because it makes filling the blockers that much easier. I'll tell you what, this doesn't feel like sort of making mud pies like when you were a kid. It's kind of elemental. I love it, this kind of stuff. Well, that's our soil blocks all made. And if you look closely, you can see the little depressions or dimples here that have been made by the inserts in the bottom here. Now, these inserts are actually interchangeable, so I could go for something a little bit deeper if sowing something like a squash seed, for example. And actually, soil blocks come in many different sizes. These ones here are a little under 2 inches or 5 centimetres wide. You can get much smaller ones and much bigger ones, and you can choose the right size for the seed that you're sowing. So I'm going to sow some celery seeds into here, and they can grow on in here until it's time to plant them out in maybe a month. So these are really, really fine seeds, but just a couple of seeds or so in each, and then we'll thin out to 1 seedling in each little plug here once we're done. And then because the seed is really, really fine, I'm just going to take some separate potting mix here and just kind of flake it in like that to barely cover them like that. Ordinarily, you could just push in some of the mix from the soil block itself to cover, but I think this is just easier for these kind of really, really tiny seeds. These shouldn't need watering now because these are still really moist, but when I come to water, I can use something like this fine mist sprayer here to avoid disturbing the surface too much. Or another idea, I put them on this mesh tray here, and then I can put them in a matching kind of tray like this, and then have a sort of reservoir of water, let them soak up the water from the bottom, and then once they've had enough, just lift them out like that. and that avoids disturbing the blocks and having them potentially falling apart. Let them dry off at the surface just a touch between waterings, and that should stop any algae growing over the surface. Now, I accept there's a bit of an irony that they're now sitting in a plastic tray, but of course you could use a wire mesh and an alternative tray to avoid the plastic use. And in fact, soil blocks have many other advantages aside from saving plastic, which we'll go through next. The real joy of soil blocks is that they're really good for the seedlings that you're growing in them. Because there are no walls around the soil there, it means that more air can get to the roots, which will encourage a healthier root system and stronger, healthier seedlings as a result. Then when the roots do get to the edge of the soil block, they will be naturally air pruned, meaning they won't get congested and pot bound and will just transplant easier as stronger seedlings. And of course, because you can see the roots growing out to the sides of your soil blocks, knowing when to pot on or plant out will be that much more obvious. These guys don't need removing from any plug tray, so there's no disturbance as well, which makes the transition from nursery environment to the ground seamless. I love the self-reliance that soil blocking offers. No need for plastic plug trays, so no waste, just seeds and potting mix. Now, for more on starting your first garden or growing better and more crops, well, I invite you to download the free abridged version of my book, which you can get simply for signing up to our video newsletter. Just pop on over here to download your copy now. I'll catch you next time.